Somewhere deep inside, something still hurts. A look, a silence, a word left unsaid. Most people think they've moved on from childhood, but the truth is, the child never left. He simply learned to survive. She walks through life with invisible scars. He builds his dreams on unstable ground. And when things fall apart, they wonder why. They don't realize that the cracks were there long before adulthood, etched by the hands of those who were supposed to protect them. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." But what if those burdens, the disappointments, the shame, the wounds, weren't here to destroy us, but to awaken us? What if the pain we carry from our families isn't just pain, but a spiritual initiation? What if the very people who hurt us the most are mirrors, not of our weakness, but of the sacred task we were born to complete? This is not about blame. This is not about victimhood. This is about something much deeper. This is about the moment when the soul begins to whisper, "Look here, look where it hurts. There lies your power." Family wounds are archetypal. They are universal and yet deeply personal. They are the first myths we live through, and in every myth, the hero must return to where the wound began, because only there can they truly become whole. In this journey, we will explore what Jung called the wound as the place where the light enters. We'll see how the pain passed down from generation to generation isn't a curse, but a calling, because the only way out is in. And the deeper we go into the roots of our pain, the closer we come to the truth of who we are. The origin wound, where the trauma begins. She was only 5 when she learned that silence could be dangerous. He was 8 when he realized that being himself wasn't safe. Most don't remember the exact moment it happened, because the origin wound doesn't arrive with thunder. It arrives quietly, through a glance, a cold absence, a broken promise. And just like that, the soul splits. Carl Jung called it the primal experience, the moment the child meets a world that does not see them. And in that moment, a sacred fracture begins, not just in the psyche, but in the soul. Children are born whole. They arrive full of instinct, emotion, imagination, closer to the self than they will ever be again. But in most families, this raw aliveness is too much, too wild, too inconvenient, too unfamiliar. So, the child adapts. She silences her voice to avoid punishment. He performs to earn a glance of approval. They learn that love is conditional and truth is dangerous, and in trying to survive, they abandon themselves. This is the beginning of the origin wound. It's not always dramatic. It doesn't always involve violence or obvious neglect. Sometimes it's the subtle things that cut the deepest. The parent who is physically present but emotionally absent. The father who never cries. The mother who sacrifices everything and makes her child feel guilty for it. The family that smiles but never speaks the truth. Over time, these small fractures form patterns, and patterns become identities. The boy who was never heard becomes the man who over-explains. The girl who was controlled becomes the woman who fears her own power. The child who had to be perfect becomes the adult who can't rest. And yet they don't realize that none of this is who they are. It's who they became to be loved. Jung taught that the family is the first field of projection, a stage where every archetype dances: the mother, the father, the hero, the shadow, the victim, the savior. But when these roles are rigid, when love is withdrawn or conditional, the child doesn't just suffer, the child splits. He called this complex formation. A complex is not just a bad memory. It's a living cluster of energy that operates outside of conscious control, and often it's born inside the family. These complexes live in the unconscious. They are triggered in relationships, at work, in silence, in conflict. You think you're reacting to the present, but you're really reliving the past. This is the tragic magic of the origin wound. It hides itself so well, we think it's just life. But behind every self-sabotage, every emotional overreaction, every chronic fear, there's a child still waiting to be seen, still waiting to be safe, still waiting to be whole. And here's the paradox Jung understood better than anyone. What we avoid most in ourselves is exactly what holds the key to our awakening. The family wound is not random. It is ancestral. It is archetypal. It is, in many ways, sacred, because until we confront it, we remain bound. But the moment we turn toward it, the journey home begins. Not the home we were born into, but the home we were always meant to create within, the family complex, when the past controls the present. She walks into a room and immediately scans for approval. He hears a tone in someone's voice and feels shame flood his chest. Neither of them knows why. They only know that something old has been awakened again. This is the quiet power of a complex. Carl Jung defined a complex as a constellation of thoughts, emotions, memories, and behaviors that live in the unconscious and override conscious will. But for most people, a complex doesn't feel like a psychological term. It feels like being hijacked by fear, by rage, by guilt, by shame. And more often than not, these complexes are born in the family. The family is our first universe. It is where we learn what love means, what safety feels like, what it costs to belong. And when something in that system is out of balance, even subtly, the child internalizes it, not as a flaw in the system, but as a flaw in themselves. Jung understood that the child's mind is mythic. It doesn't see the parent as a flawed human being. It sees them as godlike, the source of life and death, love and punishment. So if love is withdrawn, the child doesn't question the parent. They question themselves. If I was better, if I was quieter, if I didn't cry so much, maybe they would love me. And thus, the complex is born. But here is where the real damage happens. The child survives. They adapt, and that adaptation becomes a mask. He becomes the achiever, always trying to prove his worth. She becomes the caretaker, always putting others first. They become the invisible one, never asking for too much, and it works for a while, until life asks for something deeper, until a relationship becomes too intimate, until a dream demands too much visibility, until stress cracks the perfect mask and the complex erupts. Suddenly, you're 35, but feeling like a helpless child. You're in a calm conversation, but your heart is racing like you're in danger. You're overreacting to something small, but inside it feels huge. That's not just emotion, that's memory. Emotional memory stored in the body, buried in the unconscious. Jung saw these moments not as failures, but as invitations. Every time a complex is triggered, it reveals where the psyche is not yet whole. It shows us where the past still lives, and where we have yet to reclaim our power. One of Jung's most profound insights was that we do not have complexes. We are possessed by them. In those moments, we are no longer fully ourselves. We become the child again, afraid, unseen, unworthy. And yet, within the complex is a clue, a map, a seed of transformation. Because the family complex, once seen, can be unhooked, not erased, but integrated, not forgotten, but honored. It begins by recognizing this reaction is not about now. It's about then. This fear is not mine. It was inherited. This guilt does not belong to me. It belongs to the system. And slowly, gently, we begin to reclaim ourselves. To feel anger where we once felt only shame. To speak truth where we once silenced ourselves. To take up space where we were told to shrink. This is not rebellion. This is restoration. The family complex loses its grip not through blame, but through awareness, through the courageous act of remembering, of feeling, of grieving what was lost. because only then can something new emerge, and that something new is you. Not the you they needed you to be, not the mask you wore to survive, but the original you, waiting beneath the ruins of a forgotten childhood. The family shadow, what was rejected, becomes the key. He was always too sensitive. She was too much. They were told to calm down, sit still, be nice. And so they did, but something in them never forgot. It lingered in dreams. It erupted in conflict. It whispered in the quiet moments, something wild, something exiled. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the part of us that holds everything we were not allowed to be. Anger, grief, desire, power. The shadow is not evil. It is simply rejected. And for most people, that rejection begins in the family. From the very beginning, children learn which parts of themselves are welcome and which parts are dangerous. If a boy cries, he may be mocked. If a girl speaks too loudly, she may be silenced. If a child expresses anger, they may be punished, or worse, ignored. So they adapt. They cut off pieces of their soul to fit into the shape of what the family can accept. But those pieces don't disappear. They sink into the unconscious, into the body, into the shadow. And here lies the paradox. What we push away becomes powerful. What we deny begins to control us. The one who repressed their anger becomes explosive. The one who denied their sadness becomes numb. The one who buried their creativity feels empty, and they don't know why. They only know that something vital is missing, and they search for it in relationships, in success, in spirituality. But it cannot be found outside, because what's missing is them. The shadow, Jung taught, is not a flaw. It is the unlived life. And for many, that unlived life is made of ancestral patterns, generations of silence, of emotional repression, of roles passed down like heirlooms. He was never allowed to rest, so now his son cannot stop working. She never had a voice, so now her daughter cannot speak her truth. They lived with guilt, so now guilt feels like love. The shadow is not just personal, it's familial, and it holds the very energy we need to become whole. But integrating the shadow is not easy. It means feeling what we were taught to suppress. It means honoring the emotions we were told to fear. It means admitting that parts of us still carry rage, grief, lust, terror, and that those parts are human. The family may not understand. They may still expect you to play the role, to be the good son, the obedient daughter, the quiet one, the strong one. But your soul does not want you to be good. It wants you to be whole, and wholeness requires depth. It requires dissent. It requires a kind of inner rebellion, not against the family, but against the false self that was created to survive it. When the shadow is faced, something remarkable happens. You stop reacting, you start choosing, you stop repeating, you start creating. You become someone who can feel anger without being consumed by it, someone who can express grief without drowning, someone who can access power without using it to control others or hide from themselves. And maybe, for the first time, you begin to feel free, not because you've escaped your family, but because you've reclaimed what they could not carry. This is the work of the soul, not to erase the past, but to redeem it, not to reject the shadow, but to welcome it home. Because the part of you they told you was too much, that's where your medicine lives. The call of the self, when pain becomes awakening. At first it feels like breaking. Something falls apart, a relationship, a dream, a carefully built identity. Grief rises, old wounds open, the ache is unbearable, and in the middle of that darkness, a voice begins to whisper, not from outside, but from within. This is the call of the self. In Jungian psychology, the self is not the ego. It is the totality of who we are, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, human and divine. It is the center of the psyche, the source of true healing, and it speaks most clearly when the ego is wounded. She thought her life was falling apart. He thought the depression would destroy him. They thought the pain would never end. But what they didn't realize was this: the pain was not punishment, it was a summons. Jung wrote that only the wounded physician heals, and what wounds us often prepares us to heal, not only ourselves, but others. But this alchemical transformation does not happen on the surface. It happens in the underworld of the soul. Pain is the invitation, but the self is the one who answers. When we are broken open by life, something ancient awakens. We begin to question everything. Why do I feel so empty? Whose life am I really living? What parts of me have I buried were just to survive? These questions are not signs of weakness. They are signs of emergence. The self does not seek comfort. It seeks truth. And truth is often found in the ruins of everything we once clung to. The family wounds that once felt like chains begin to reveal something deeper, a pattern, a myth, a sacred story unfolding. You begin to see that your suffering wasn't random. It was precise. You were not broken. You were being shaped. The silence taught you to listen. The rejection taught you to return to yourself. The chaos taught you to find your inner center. And from that center, the self begins to guide. Not loudly, not with force, but with dreams, with synchronicities, with the subtle magnetism of what feels alive. Suddenly, you meet people who mirror your awakening. Books find you at the right time. Your body starts speaking in symptoms, in sensations, in sacred fatigue. This is not coincidence. It is the unconscious becoming conscious. And that is the essence of awakening. It is not the escape from suffering. It is the transformation of it. It is when we stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to reveal?" The self does not offer shortcuts. It leads through the terrain of the wound because it knows that's where your power was buried. You do not awaken by running from your past. You awaken by walking back into the fire, with eyes open, with hearts softened, with the courage to feel what was once unbearable. And when you do, something changes. The pain becomes sacred, the story becomes mythic, and your life becomes yours again. This is the moment when the soul stops surviving and begins to live, not in reaction to the family, not in rebellion against the past, but in alignment with a truth deeper than conditioning, older than trauma, wiser than fear. The self is not something you become, it is something you remember, and that remembering is what the pain came to give you. Transcending the family fate, the hero who returns home. Every great myth begins with a rupture. A young hero leaves home, not always by choice. Sometimes by betrayal, sometimes by grief, sometimes by a quiet, aching intuition that something more is calling. But in every story, there comes a moment, the moment when the hero must return, not to the comfort of the past, but to reclaim it. This is the final stage of the journey Jung described as individuation, the path toward becoming who you truly are. And it always leads back home. Not to live there necessarily, not to belong in the same way, but to see it clearly, to see them clearly, to look upon the very system that once wounded you and choose a different fate. Transcending the family fate does not mean cutting ties in anger or pretending the past didn't happen. It means stepping out of the unconscious patterns that have been passed down for generations. It means becoming the one who breaks the cycle, not by rejecting your roots, but by alchemizing them. She was raised in silence. Now she speaks. He was taught to suppress. Now he feels. They were told to conform. Now they create. And slowly the lineage begins to shift. What was once shame becomes wisdom. What was once secrecy becomes truth. What was once fear becomes freedom. But make no mistake, this is not a straight path. Returning home as a conscious being is often more painful than leaving ever was. You begin to see the sorrow behind the anger, the fear behind the control, the unlived lives behind the roles they played, and you grieve. Not just for yourself, but for your ancestors, for what they could not say, for what they could not be, for how the trauma was never personal, just passed down, hand to hand, like a silent inheritance. But you are not here to carry that inheritance. You are here to transform it. This is the role of the hero who returns home, not to be understood, but to understand, not to seek validation, but to live in truth. Not to change them, but to change the inner contract that once bound you to suffering. This is the turning point, when the wound becomes the womb, when the trauma becomes the teacher, when the pain becomes purpose. And this purpose does not shout. It moves quietly through you, in how you parent, in how you love, in how you treat yourself when no one is watching. You are not here to be perfect. You are here to be whole, and wholeness is contagious. Every time you forgive yourself, you free someone in your bloodline. Every time you speak your truth, you loosen the knot of shame around an ancestor's throat. Every time you choose presence over repetition, you change the future. This is the return, not as the wounded child, but as the integrated adult, not as the victim, but as the carrier of light. Jung knew this truth well. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And becoming who you are means facing where you came from, not with blame, but with fierce compassion, because only then can you offer the one thing that was missing from your childhood, yourself, fully, freely, finally, the wound as portal, returning to the soul. Somewhere inside, it still aches. Not because you're broken, but because you're remembering, and the remembering is sacred. Throughout this journey, we've seen that family wounds are not random. They are precise invitations. Painful, yes, but purposeful. They mark the place where the ego was first fractured and where the soul now longs to return. Carl Jung believed that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That darkness often begins at home, in the stories we were told, in the love we were taught to earn, in the silence we were forced to accept. But now, you are no longer the child. You are the witness, the healer, the bridge between the past and what's possible. The family wound is not just a scar, it is a portal. Through it, you find your voice, your boundaries, your grief, your power, and ultimately, yourself. This path is not easy. There will be days when the old voices return. Who do you think you are? Don't speak. Don't feel. But those voices no longer own you. They are echoes, remnants of a system you are no longer bound to, because you've seen the truth, that your worth is not negotiable, that your pain has meaning, that your soul was never lost, only waiting for you to stop running, waiting for you to turn inward, waiting for you to say, "This ends with me." And so now, as this journey closes, or perhaps begins again, ask yourself not how to escape the pain, but what it came to teach you. Ask not how to fix your past, but how to integrate it. Ask not how to be perfect, but how to be whole. Because your awakening was never meant to look like light and peace and clarity. It was always meant to look like courage and mess and the quiet miracle of choosing yourself again and again. So let this be your new myth, the one where you returned to the wound and found the soul still burning. If this story spoke to something deep in you, it's not by accident. Like and subscribe to walk this path of inner transformation with us. And remember, your wound is not the end of your story. It's where the real story begins.